Okay, so it's right amongst the hour here, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. All right, good afternoon. So my name is Sean Palmer. I'm with ACT Aspire, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Wyoming Technology Readiness training. I wanted to let folks know that upon coming into the actual webinar, I did go ahead and mute everyone just for background noise and make sure that we get through the entire presentation. Everyone is able to hear the dialogue. I will keep the chat window open, so if you do have questions, I'll try to wait until towards the end of that particular presentation to be able to answer a lot of the questions, but there is a chat feature that you can go through and ask questions, and then when we get to the end, we'll go ahead and answer those, and I'll go through and unmute everyone so we can answer all those questions. I also want to let everyone know that at the end of this particular training, I am recording this, and I'll post it to our Wyoming specific advocate site. So that'll be under T for training, and so this recorded session will be able to be accessed later on if you want to go back and look at that. It looks like Pat was just asking that same question. So, and then I did this particular training last Wednesday, and someone had asked if I could post the slide deck on there as well. So I made a PDF version of the slide deck that I'm going to walk through, and that is actually posted already to the advocate site. So a couple of good references for you. If there's some questions you wanted to go back and look at, you can go back and replay the actual entire training as well as the slide deck to be able to for the future. Okay. So again, today we're going to go through a couple of things. We're going to go through the schedule of events, just so everyone is aware of what's going to happen during this spring 2017 admin. We're going to talk about the various components and technology and system requirements for ACT Aspire. We know that last year we have probably a combination of folks that are brand new in testing ACT Aspire as well as folks that participated last year. So to make sure I'm covering everything, I'm going to present all the information just like you were brand new to the system, but I'm also going to highlight some sections that have new functionality. So even if you did implement from a technology perspective ACT Aspire last year, I'll highlight some differences that you want to make sure that you're pertaining to. We're also going to review the infrastructure trial. That's something that's going to be, we utilized last year. It's going to be structured a little bit differently, and so we'll talk through that as well. And then resources that are available to you at the districts and schools. Make sure you mute everyone here. Okay. First is really the schedule of events. And from here, I just wanted to highlight there's a 12-step process for ACT Aspire. Some of them pertain to the technologists, and some of them pertain to the test administrators. And so I wanted to highlight these just really, really quick to give you guys an idea. This particular training is targeted for the technologist in mind. So if you're the tech coordinator or a test administrator, this is the right one for you. We're going to talk about the technology and setup of ACT Aspire. So the ones that are step 6 here that are highlighted in red, and step 8 are specific technology steps. So when I go through this, please take special care to highlight those particular sections. But what we ended up doing is at the beginning of the year, we had a rollover process that flipped from the students and the test results from the spring of 2016 to the new spring 2017. What we ended up doing is we went through the entire portal and made sure that any folks that did have access, are correct. They should be the right person that's in the system. We actually matched that up to the WD's Fusion system to make sure that it's up to date. And if there are folks that aren't listed there, that we restructure those. One of the things that we also ask is that, if you do have folks that participated and helped you last year that are no longer with you, if you could go through and make sure, if you're an admin, to make sure that you close their access so they can't get into the system. Step 2, we have the implementation training. So we have 2 trainings. One was last week on February 8th. And again, this particular training, this is specifically around technology. We also have 2 more trainings that are coming up, March 21st and March 23rd. Those are going to be the test administration training. So those are around, if you're an administrator in the system and you are going to be working with your room supervisors and the folks that are going to be proctoring exams, what do you need to know within the portal themselves to make sure everything is set up properly and you're ready to go on the day of testing? So again, those particular dates are March 21st and 23rd. Those 2 will be recorded, and we'll make those available on the Avista site. Step 3 are the student data. So one thing to note, the Wyoming Department of Education is already taking what the students have been uploaded at the state. So if you have 9th and 10th graders that are registered in your particular school and district, the state has already uploaded those students into the system. They did the heavy lifting for you already, so that's wonderful they did that. Between January 23rd and March 3rd, what we ask is that you go through the system and make sure that the students are current. You want to make sure that all the students are up to date. So if there are new students that came in your school recently and need to be added, that you add those students, and if students have left, they either remove them from the system or transfer them as appropriately. On the right-hand side, we do also have different sessions, so that I'll show you a little bit later is the training management system. There are different modules that you can go through that tell you how to update either the students or the test sessions or manually update the student data. And that's what is aligned on the right-hand side. Okay, then we have step 4, which is around the accessibility and accommodations. So from January 23rd to March 10th, as you're reviewing that student's information, if you have students that need special accommodations, that's where you would highlight them there. For example, if they needed to take extended time, or in certain circumstances they needed a special form of the test, you can put those comments for the students within the PNP section, which stands for Personal Needs Profile, underneath the student profile itself. So we ask that as you're reviewing the students to make sure that they're accurate and you have the most recent roster, that you assign those PNPs for all those students. One thing to denote, that if the student was in the system as a 9th grader last year and they are taking the exam as a 10th grader this year and they had those PNPs that are associated to them, that information is retained from last year. Now, unfortunately, if you have new 9th graders, we didn't have that information from last year. There's nothing that we're able to carry over, but you'd have to put those new attributes into them. But for those that were 9th graders last year that are now 10th graders this year, those PNPs do carry over. Step 5, we have creating groups. The timeline to be able to do that is February 1st through March 3rd. So you have a few more weeks to be able to do that. That is an optional component. Creating groups helps on 2 different sets. One, when you're creating the test sessions, it helps them do specific groups in math. So you can create groups all at one time for all the various subjects. And then the other portion of it is from the reporting standpoint, at the institution level, so at the school, you are able to, there's 2 specific reports that are group related, and you're able to sort the students or group them, if you will, according to your group name, and pull those specific reports. So it's an optional component, but it is something that is very useful from both perspectives. Then we get into step 6. And step 6, again, is a red particular step. It's a technology-specific step. We want to make sure from February 1st to March 17th, so this is happening right now, that from a technical perspective, you're reviewing all the requirements, any new bulletins that have happened, any new documentation that's aligned, and you should also be configuring your local technology. So this is kind of the first step. You participate in this training session, you review what materials are available to you, and then kind of go from there. And that's going to be from February 1st to March 17th. The next step here is step 7, which is the test session setup. That happens between February 1st and March 31st, so that's a couple of months here. And that's after all the students have been set up. You start creating test sessions for those given students. That what they end up doing is assigning the students' information to the actual test that they're going to be taking. So that test session setup can take some time, and that's why we established a 2-month window there. Step 8, which is another technology task, happens between March 17th and April 7th, and that is the pre-caching of test content. And I've had a couple of folks ask, when can I start caching content? We have that slated from March 17th to April 7th. I would also like to recommend, so that seems like it's a ways away. The new forms are actually going to be loaded. It's interesting, it's actually loading tonight. So by the end of the week here, you should actually be able to look at the Proctor Cache settings and where the tests are listed. And the new forms for spring of 2017 are actually going to be available. So from a technology standpoint, you'll be able to download that new content. We want to make sure typically that you have the latest information, and we typically highlight that to happen between 2 to 3 weeks prior to testing. So that's why the window is March 17th to April 7th. But actually, we got them loaded a little bit earlier. So if you wanted to go in and pre-test that content starting tomorrow, you're able to do that. Step 9 is print student authorization tickets. So this is the connection between what you're setting up in the portal from the students and the test session that they're actually assigned to. And you print the authorization tickets that has the username and password, and that's what the student actually puts into the TestNav app that links everything all together. So those are called the test authorization tickets. We like to have that done typically 2 weeks prior to the testing window. Obviously, step 10 and 11 are the big ones. You want to start the test sessions in the portal, and the actual test window for ACT Aspire this year is April 10th to May 3rd. So those are things to highlight. And then the last thing here is if there's any type of irregularity, so if the student maybe made it halfway and got sick for some reason, or was absent during that time and didn't actually take the test, but they were assigned into a particular test session, you can denote those irregularities, and we want those all entered into the system by April 12th to May 10th. All righty, let's talk a little bit about computer-based testing programs. So let's get into the bolts of the system here. Okay, the first component that we have within the computer-based testing is the ACT Aspire portal. So the ACT Aspire portal is truly the assessment administration portal. So this is where the test admin or the test coordinator would go in to manage all the student data, the test sessions, the personal needs profiles that I talked about, and access the reports. Many people from a technology standpoint say, well, do I really need access into the ACT Aspire portal themselves? And the answer is yes. You need to be able to set up the Proctor caching server and point the test sessions that are being created to that Proctor caching server. And I'll be going through that here in a few minutes. So the answer is yes. From a technologist perspective, you do need access to the ACT Aspire portal. Then we have TestNav 8, and TestNav is really student test delivery engine. So this is what's installed at the student's machine. We have many different clients for TestNav 8. It is something that is both secure and has a early warning system that's involved in it as well. So the early warning system is really nice. Within TestNav, it maintains the students' responses. So when the students are taking the test, it actually writes that to a local encrypted save and response file on the system. And then after a few minutes, it transfers that to the ACT Aspire servers. Then TestNav waits for that handshake or the acknowledgement that it's received that materials, and then moves the student along. So it's a very nice way to be able to package small bundles of information of how the student's performing, and it also maintains, the rigor of the student's testing session. So that's nice. So sometimes if you would have an internet hiccup or internet hiccup, for example, and it only lasts a few minutes, the nice thing is the student doesn't even know that there's probably an issue because it's waiting to get 4 or 5 responses cached, and then it'll go make the connection back up to the Aspire servers to send the information, and then get the handshake back to go and continue on. So that's a nice thing. The early warning system is a very valuable tool within TestNav 8. And we'll go through, there's some other enhancements to TestNav 8 we'll highlight. App check. So app check is something that's brand new. App check is replacing our old system that we had, which was called system check. And now that we're turning to TestNav 8 utilizing the apps, what it is it's a method for being able to verify your system is ready. So what it does is it checks the connection between the student's device and the Proctor caching server. And it also checks the connection between the student's device and the ACT Aspire portal, or excuse me, the ACT Aspire scoring system. So we'll review that here a little bit more in depth. And then the last one is Proctor Cache. So Proctor Cache works with TestNav to reduce bandwidth requirements, and I'll be showing that in a little bit more depth here in the next few slides. Okay, so the next page that I have on here is the Technology landing site. So the Technology landing page, if you don't remember anything after leaving this and you take away one particular URL, it's this particular site here. And it's http://actaspire.pearson.com. This particular page is what I use most frequently when I talk to either technical folks or test administrator folks that want to know how to set up ACT Aspire. It has all the information from all the technical readiness manuals. It has the latest TestNav system requirements. It has any new technical bulletins. It has all the links for app check, what the information is around app check. It has all the information for Proctor Cache and TestNav 8. It also has all of our application installations as well. So those can be either on a desktop, on a Chromebook, or an iPad. And all those are listed on one central location on this particular site. And it's a good one-stop shop of being able to go to this particular URL, click on the technology setup, and it has all the information on one page. So again, that's http://actaspire.pearson.com. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the system requirements. So there are really 3 different requirements that we're going to talk about. And again, it's the ACT Aspire portal, the Proctor Cache server, and TestNav 8. So the ACT Aspire portal is the admin portion. That's all browser-based. The Proctor Cache settings, we'll talk a little bit about the requirements for Proctor Cache, as well as TestNav 8, which is the application that the students actually test from. Some of the requirements, specific documents that you may want to reference is on the actual, again, on that technology setup section on the landing page. So what I just mentioned on the previous slide is under technology. It's on that particular page. The other thing is that on the Avocet site, you can click on the A along the left-hand side, and there will be a link for the ACT Aspire Portal Users Guide that gives you all information of how to access the site, what different sections you would go in for certain tasks. It's a wide range of information from, you know, what do I need to do for students? What do I need to do from setting up test sessions? How do I get Proctor Cache set up? Where do I access all my reports? So all that is attained within the Portal Users Guide. Underneath that same section in Avocet is P. So you can click on the P and along the left-hand navigation side, and you can click on the Proctor Cache User Guide. So that gives you everything from top to bottom information around Proctor Cache. What is Proctor Cache? Where do I get the latest information? What's the system requirements? How do I get it installed? When do I need to perform certain functions? All that is listed in the Proctor Cache User Guide. And then the third one that I would want to make sure that you guys highlight as well is in Avocet on the left-hand side under T is the TestNav hardware and software requirements. So as I mentioned before, there is a TestNav app that is for TestNav 8.8 that you download. And it'll have a section for the desktop installation. So that happens, that is able to be downloaded on a Windows PC or Mac. There is an iPad installation as well as a Chromebook installation. Okay, I'm reading a quick question. We have the TestNav 8 installer 1.5. Does this give us the current version TestNav 8? So it does not. We'll go through that so Bob will go through that in a few more slides when we get closer to TestNav 8, and I'll talk a little bit about the differences between prior versions and where we are now. So I'll highlight that in just a few minutes here. Okay, going back to the slide deck, we have for the ACT Aspire trifecta. I call this the trifecta because there are three main parts of ACT Aspire, and they all talk back and forth. So let's start at the top. So again, the ACT Aspire portal. Not only from a technology standpoint, it's where you set up the student information and you assign the students to a particular test, or what we call a test session. So within those test sessions, that's assigning the students to take the English, reading, writing, math, and science test. It assigns them what's called an actual user ID and a password, and that information is linked to the bottom left-hand side, which is TestNav. So that's the information that you would be able to, when you open up the actual app on the device, whether it be a desktop, Mac, a Chromebook, or an iPad, that's where you would get that information to be able to put the user ID and password. So that's where the information goes back and forth between the portal at the top to TestNav on the left-hand side. Now, you may be asking about Proctor Cache. So Proctor Cache on the right-hand side is where we get all the local test content. And Proctor Cache has been very useful and has seemed to fix many, many technology woes that we've had over the years to make sure that the student is actually always getting the most accurate results and all of the content at the best performance possible. So what we ask is that the technologists, you folks, actually download all of the test content to the Proctor caching machine. The students using the link that's provided in the user ID that's provided in the apps from the portal will log into the TestNav app, and by doing that, it's actually going to pull the content for the actual test from your Proctor caching server itself. So it's going to pull that information. So the nice thing is it's all included into your intranet. So that's very useful because Many times you have issues of, the ISPs going out, your internet service providers having issues, and it can be just a quick, 30-second blip of connectivity, and it can kick all your students out. So what we found is that Proctor Cache has been a very useful tool in establishing and maintaining all that content, linking it, and pulling that data directly, or providing that data directly to the TestNav apps themselves. So again, this is the ACT Aspire trifecta, as I call it. The portal at the top, the TestNav agent on the right-hand side, and then the TestNav app on the left-hand side. And we'll go into each of these a little bit more here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the portal. And I mentioned earlier, a lot of technology folks ask me, do I really need access into the portal? This seems like it's the admin piece. Do I need access into it? And the answer is yes. As I mentioned in the previous slide, it's a trifecta. You need to be able to access all the various components in order to make this work. What you end up doing from a technology standpoint is logging into the portal, clicking on your specific organization, which is up on the top hand side, and you're going to, where a technologist is going to reside, is really going to be in the 3 different settings there between manage Proctor caching. So you're going to set up the Proctor cache settings, so that's going to be establishing the IP address and the port. You're going to be able to download the pre-cache test to your Proctor cache server, so this is where you're going to be able to do that. And then the managed test sessions is if you do any maintenance of any test sessions that have already occurred and you've updated the IP to those to the Proctor cache server, you're able to update all those specific IP addresses to those particular test sessions. So we'll review that here in a few minutes. So again, you do need access into the portal. After you click on the previous slide here was Proctor cache settings, you're then taken to this particular screen. You'll have your school name, you'll have your district code, and the state. Obviously, this is fictitious. But the big thing that you'll want to put in here and highlight is the bottom section here. It's the Proctor caching server details. So after you set up your Proctor cache server itself, we'll need to designate the IP address to that. So typically that's a code that's listed here in the section 10.25.180.194. So obviously this is going to be something that's going to be specific to your implementation and what your server is setting on. And then from a port perspective, 95% of the time we just leave it at port 4480. Sometimes there's another application that's using that same port and we'll switch it to 4481. But again, 95% of the time we'll use port 4480. And you would click save, and then what that does is any new test sessions that are created on that point going forward will automatically it'll automatically default to this specific IP address of being able to pull content, test content. So for example, if you're creating English tests going forward, and this has been established, it automatically assigns, in this particular case, to pull test content from this Proctor cache server at 10.25.180.194 through port 4480. So again, something that's nice that you establish at this particular screen. I would also like to note that when you are setting up your Proctor cache server, that you the IP address that you're establishing, that is a fixed IP. You don't want that changing. That particular IP address, if you set it up and have all of your test sessions that are created afterwards to point to a different IP, or if it rolls every month, you'll have to go through and reestablish all the connections for the test sessions that you created to the most current IP. So again, once you set this up, make sure that whatever server that you're setting it up on doesn't have a rolling IP, that it's something that's fixed, that you can maintain from this point forward to the end of your testing window. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about proctor caching. So again, proctor cache is the software that's used in conjunction with TestNav to reduce bandwidth requirements and accelerate the delivery of test content. So what can you do with proctor cache? You can pre-cache all the test content before onto your local network. You can also reduce and eliminate the redundant downloads of test content, which will reduce the burden on your ISP or your internet service provider. And you can store all that data encrypted locally on the server itself. So it's very safe. While proctor caching right now is required, in the previous years we've had it where it's been an option component, it's very highly recommended, and there's been so many things that we've seen from a technology setup, huge benefits to that we want to go ahead and continue that and actually do request that it's required. Oh, there it is. Proctor caching is not required to do all of its benefits. All right. So for new folks who may ask, you know, do I really need this? I have a great, you know, I have a great internet connection that's, you know, a direct T1 line. We paid all this information, all this money to make sure that we had the highest speed of connection. You know, do I really need a proctor caching server? And really the answer is yes. It creates so many benefits, and I'll kind of review these in steps. The first is, you know, without the proctor caching server, every single student's device is going up through your local network, through the internet and your ISP provider to the ACT Aspire servers to get that test content. So it's many different packages requesting information, every single item, and then getting it back. So there's a lot of different connection pieces that have to happen, and it's a large amount of data that's being sent and received. So when you use proctor caching, what you're doing is eliminating half of that bandwidth that's going back and forth. So you're only relying on, in many cases, the your what's called intranet, which is local to, you know, your brick and mortar school there, and having that proctor cache server sit on your intranet, it's going to be much quicker and more reliable than going through and sending all those packets back and forth through the internet up to the ACT Aspire servers. So again, if the student's devices are just looking for sending requests for the test content to the proctor cache server on the intranet, it's much quicker to be able to deliver that information. It's all encrypted, same security, and it helps for redundant reasons as well. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight was where you get the installers. So there have been new installers since spring of 2016. So last year, if you had proctor cache installed, it may be a good idea that you go ahead and uninstall it. That also removes all the old test content, and you know, reinstall the new applications. And again, proctor cache can be installed in both Windows and on a Mac. One thing to denote: you cannot install proctor cache, the actual proctor cache software, on an iPad or a Chromebook. It has to be on either Windows PC or Mac. A couple other things about proctor cache: it is started and run as a service. So the nice thing about that is, if you have any maintenance that goes on the machine and you have to reboot the server, it is automatically brought back up as a service so that you can reconnect to it. There's also shortcuts that exist to make sure you can start and stop it if you need to as well. Before we move on, there's a couple other questions. Does the firewall need to allow certain traffic, or can we leave the firewall settings alone? Oh, let me get to my next screen here. There we go. So the answer is yes, we do need certain, if you think about it, we need to allow certain, certain connection points between the student and the ProctorCast server. A lot of times there's specific settings that are in here that I'll highlight. It's not on this page, it's coming up here in another few slides. There are 4 URLs that you have to allow within your internet and your firewall to be able to send information back and forth between the student's devices and the ProctorCast server. Again, I'll highlight those coming forward here, Bob. There was one more from, let's see, Mackenzie. Are there any improvements in TestNav or force positive or background applications and processes? Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the TestNav section of what the improvements have been. When we get to the Q&A section, we'll talk a little bit about false positives and background applications and processes. So I'll review that information when we get to the TestNav section again. All right, going back into the presentation here. So ProctorCast system requirements. So again, it runs on a Windows PC or a Mac. It runs on OS 10. It does utilize the ports 80, 40, 443, and 4480 and 4481. It does require a fixed internal IP address. So again, which I was mentioned before, you don't want to have the IP address rolling or for a specific amount of time here while you're testing, so that if you do have an IP address that changes, what happens is all the students' test sessions that are created within the portal that have that IP address will automatically default to that. And if it changes, you have to go into the manage test session and change it to the new IP address. So that takes an additional step. So we do recommend that you do have a fixed internal IP address for the term, either from now to the end of testing, or if you do, there's some additional work you have to do. You utilize AppCheck to test the connectivity. So AppCheck, again, is a new utility that you can test the connection from the student's TestNav device that's running on the student's machine to the ProctorCast server. The requirements are not something that is huge. So this isn't, if you're worried about, oh, I need to go get a huge server that's going to, it's going to cost a ton of money. That is not the case. The minimum requirement is a 1.6 gigahertz, 86 compatible, a 2 gigahertz Intel dual processor. So that's, and they do recommend, a gig of RAM. So any day now, that's typically any laptop or PC has much, much more hardware than that. So it's not something that needs to have a huge server base. It's not a huge processing application. The one thing that it does need is that connectivity portion. So again, you can't have it sitting in, another side of the building that is kind of blocked off by all the firewall. The entire purpose is to be able to have access to it so the students' machines can have connectivity to that particular device. And again, it runs on OS 10, it's 10.7, 10.8, 9, 10, 11. And then from a Windows perspective, it runs on Windows Server 2008, Windows 7, Windows Server 2012, Windows 8, Windows 10. Okay, talk a little bit about ProctorCast, and once you get into the ProctorCast diagnostic screen, what you actually see and what the various settings are. So once you have the software installed on your ProctorCast server itself, you'll be able to go into the application of the diagnostic screen, and there are 3 different tabs, if you will, at the very top of the screen. There'll be the test tab, which is what you'll provide most of the time in there. And what that does is allows you to look at all the test content that's cached on the server and what the status is. So once you do the initial request, you'll actually see that test forms come up in the test section. They'll have a red, yellow, and green status. What you want is when it's a yellow status, that means it's in a loading process. If it does have any connectivity issues, it'll turn red and show you the error message of what that particular content needs to be reloaded. And over at the end, you get down and it has all your test content and it's green. I would also like to note that, so I mentioned there's 5 particular test forms. So you'll be looking for early high school, reading, writing, math, science, reading, writing, English, math, and science. So you look at those particular 5 forms. When you look at the test content in the Proctor Cache server, there's actually going to be many more forms that load. The reason is because based off of the student's accommodation, there may be a specific form that needs special text-to-speech, or they may need some other form that's needed for a special accommodation. And so you'll actually see more forms than just the typical normal test that a student pulls up within a given test session. So it's totally fine and very normal to see more than just the 5 files that are being loaded into the Proctor Cache test screen. The clients section is very nice. That actually displays what IP addresses are connected to that particular device pulling test content. So one thing they may not know, but on the day of testing, from a test coordinator, you could actually log into this particular diagnostic screen, click on the clients, and you could see the IP address of the devices that are connecting to that particular server and pulling test content. It also has a red, yellow, green type activity, so you can see that, oh, these are successful connections, or there may be yellow, meaning that it connected for a while and now it's not pulling any test content for over 30 minutes or an hour, and it may turn to a yellow, which means it's kind of in a holding pattern, or red means that they connected and it totally dropped for some reason, and it'll give you some options to be able to reestablish that connection. It also tells you too, if you have a particular room that's having issues, it's nice to be able to look at that client screen and say, oh, well, all these IP addresses in this particular room seem to be connected fine, but you know, the IPs in some other room aren't. It's very quick to be able to do some diagnostic there and use that client screen for that particular information. And then the last option there is the settings. So one thing I would highlight is if you're changing anything from test content or the clients or the settings, there's a default Proctor Cache password. The Proctor Cache password is kind of buried into the Proctor Cache manual, but the Proctor Cache default password is lowercase t, 35, lowercase t, the number 1, lowercase n is a Nancy, and 6. And I'm going to type that into our chat session here just to make sure that everyone has that. 1 and 6. So that's the default. Oh, I'm turning that just above. Sorry about that. That is the default password. Hopefully everyone sees that in their chat window here. That's the default password for changing anything from a test content, client, or settings section in here. If you want to change it to whatever is most user-friendly for you, you would go into the settings section and change that password there. So something to know. This is going to tell you a little bit about the benefits of using Proctor Cache. So the nice thing about using Proctor Cache, again, there's no need to configure individual workstations. So the first time that you go in and set up TestNav on the student's device, you don't have to have it configured to pull from a specific Proctor Cache server. you don't have to configure it to be connected in a certain way. You install TestNav, and by using the username and password that's provided from the portal, it'll automatically denote from the student's machine where to pull the test content specific for that setting. It does use specific settings for district and schools. So again, you're going to pull those particular settings in that documentation to that IP address. Is all going to be configured locally to your school and district implementation. And then the other thing is the default settings can be applied to test sessions. So that's the link again from your specific IP address of the Proctor Cache server itself has to be tied to your specific test session. So it's another level of security and a benefit for managing your test content utilizing Proctor Cache. All right, so I'm going to show you a few more sections here around Proctor Cache. First, I wanted to highlight, that you do want to go in and click on the organization and the Proctor Cache settings. That's their first method of setting up Proctor Cache after you've installed it and you're ready for everyone in the test sessions to be assigning that particular IP address. And again, that's going into organizations at the top of the screen in the portal and going down to Proctor Cache settings. That'll open up this particular screen where you're entering the Proctor Cache IP address and that port 4480. And I think I've talked a little bit more about the fixed internal IP address, and I typically want to go to 4480, click save, and that activates it. Okay, the next section you'll come down to is you'll look for pre-caching all that content. So you've installed all the Proctor caching software there, you have it running as a service, and now you need to get that test content down to that server. So you go to organizations. This is within the actual ACT Aspire portal. You log into that, you would go into organizations, down to pre-cache test, and this is where you would highlight the particular grade, which will be EHS, which stands for early high school. And this is where you'll see the 5 test forms for English, reading, writing, math, and science. So you'll see all 5 of those. You'll be able to click the checkbox on the left-hand side, and then you'll click on the blue pre-cache button on the top right-hand side as you see it there. What that'll do is it'll launch. Typically, what I've asked folks, technologists, is to be able to go into the portal on the actual Proctor Cache server itself. That way, it's nice that you can, you have access to that particular device and you can download the content very quickly. So you would go onto that Proctor Cache machine. You would open up a browser, go into the ACT Aspire portal, click on organizations down to pre-cache test, highlight the 5 EHS test forms, and then click on that pre-cache button, which will launch you into that previous screen, which is the Manage Proctor Cache settings, to be able to watch the test content be loaded into your server. So click on those links on the left-hand side and click on pre-cache. So now let's talk a little bit about TestNav. So we're moving from Proctor Cache and now we're focusing a little bit on the TestNav. So TestNav, again, is the utility that is installed, or the app that's installed onto the students' devices that they'll be using for testing. There are 2 different versions of setting up TestNav. One is downloading the application itself and running that directly from the device. So that's a Windows PC or a Mac. It runs on an iPad and it also runs on a Chromebook. So there's specific apps that you can download from the devices to be able to install to those particular devices themselves. We've moved from recent years from a browser-based to an application-based setup, but there is still one method to be able to run TestNav from a browser, and that is through Firefox ESR 45. There's a very specific installation that we recommend that you can install and run it from a browser. So if you wanted to have an absolute zero footprint on all your testing devices, and you absolutely wanted to run it from a browser, there is a specific browser that you can install and make sure that you run, and it's Firefox ESR 45. The reason behind that is if you notice anything from what am I thinking? The Adobe, excuse me. So Adobe is something that we utilize for some of our content, our Java content, and as well as the security behind it. And so, Adobe updates Java many, many times throughout the year. And what was happening was more and more browsers are not utilizing Java as as being reliable on their particular browsers. And last year there was a number of browsers that completely dropped all support for Java. And so since we utilized Java for our security matrix, we then moved from being able to support that utility and that security from a browser and put that all into the individual install apps. And so that installable portion is what we really recommend. We want you to be able to download the apps from, if you're using on a desktop, iPad, or Chromebook. That's the typical and easiest way to be able to install and run TestNav. Bob, you had asked earlier about what type of firewalls, different URLs that we need to make sure that we put holes in our firewalls to make sure that test content can be able to go back and forth between the students' devices and the Proctor cache server. And these are the different firewall connections. So there's *tn.act-aspire.org port 80. There's the thought, which is an authentication URL. There's the *tn.act-aspire.org, port 443. And then there's also an *pearsontestcontent.com that allows us to get the content and share that content back and forth between the Proctor cache server as well as the students' devices. So those four URLs is something that we need to make sure that we highlight from a firewall perspective, and we allow those to be passed within your local intranet. I did mention that we want folks to be able to use the installable TestNav apps. So those are going to be the desktop app. There's installs for Mac, Windows, Linux, Fedora, and Linux Ubuntu. Some people ask, I have a managed server where I manage all my devices, either from a Windows perspective. We do include an MSI that's available for you to be able to push out to all your devices all at once. So again, all of these installable apps are available on the ACT Aspire landing page, and again, that's http://actaspire.pearson.com underneath the technology setup section. The iPad app is available to download through iTunes, or not iTunes, the App Store, and then the same thing with the Chromebook app. TestNav is able to download the TestNav app to the Chromebook store. Okay, so once you have TestNav installed on your device, you want to be able to make sure that a student is able to log into that particular device through TestNav, and everything's going to run smoothly. So as I mentioned, the trifecta between the portal and the Proctor caching server and the student's device is utilizing this TestNav app. So you double click on the icon, it's going to bring up this particular screen here. You want to make sure a couple of things. You want to make sure that when your student is logging in, that it does say ACT Aspire at the top. And if you notice that in the middle of the page there, that it does say ACT Aspire. If it says ACT or some other state, you want to make sure that you change the profile so that it's to ACT Aspire. There's a user icon up in the top right-hand section where it looks like a little person up there. You click on that and you want to say change login or change customer. You'll be able to click on that and select ACT Aspire, the actual image itself, and make sure that you're in the ACT Aspire section. So with student authorization tickets, once the students are into the test sessions and they actually started within the portal itself, the admins will print the test authorization tickets and hand those to the students on the day of testing. What they do is, say they have their Chromebooks or their iPads, they open those up, they click on the TestNav app, they use that piece of paper to be able, that has a username and password, to be able to log into this particular test. So this is what the screen looks like from a student's perspective. It has the username and password, they click on the sign in, and it runs authentication that it can connect to the Proctor cache server to get all the test content, and it also checks to the ACT Aspire portal to make sure that all the security is right, so it's pulling that correct test content for that given student. Next, we're going to talk about App Check. So App Check is something that's brand new this year. One thing I would also recommend too, that I wanted to make sure that I highlight from a TestNav perspective before we talk a little bit about App Check. So TestNav did come out with a new application, 8.8, at the beginning of January. So if you installed TestNav last year, spring of 2016, and tested, and have not done anything with TestNav since then, you probably would want to uninstall your TestNav applications and reinstall to make sure you have this new version. This new version is going to include this utility, which is called App Check. And what App Check does is it confirms the device or computer that's running on it that has the correct operating system and the correct version of TestNav to run to connect to all the different components. It also confirms that it's going to be able to run in a kiosk mode if it's on a iPad or a Chromebook. And that, again, like I said, it runs on the various operating systems, which are Windows, Mac OS X, Chromebooks, iPads, and Linux. The ACT Aspire customer service may also use this App Check, in troubleshooting if you come in and have any questions there. Again, if you're brand new to this App Check, you can go into the little user profile in the top right-hand side, which is that black, looks like a little person there in the top right-hand. Select App Check. That's going to, again, validate your system requirements, and it validates the connections between the student's device and the Proctor caching server. It's going to open up this particular screen, which is the App Check main screen here. There are two different methods to be able to check for connection. One, from the student's device, if you are able to pull test content and connect directly to your Proctor caching server. And two, if you aren't able to connect to your Proctor caching server and you just want to see if you can connect to the ACT Aspire servers themselves to be able to pull the test content, you can leave this configuration identifier blank and run app check as it is. So if you leave this particular configuration identifier blank and run app check, it'll actually pull test content and connectivity analysis directly from the ACT Aspire servers. So that's a good way. Sometimes I've used that a couple times if I just don't even have any outside connection. For some reason, I can't even connect to my Proctor Cache server. I don't have something set up with my firewall. But I don't know if it's the firewall that's having issues or the Proctor Cache server isn't running, or heck, maybe I don't even have TestNav working correctly. What I can do is run this app check, and it runs all the diagnostic except for the Proctor Cache connection. So you would leave that blank and run app check, and that's going to connect to the ACT Aspire servers themselves and run all the analysis. And it'll look like this. It'll run like a kiosk mode pass and a connectivity pass. The other option, which is what we most recommend, is to get a configuration identifier. And what you're going to do is go into, I'm going to show you just here in a second, go into the portal where the same section that you put in the IP address and the port. Underneath that, once you've established that, it'll assign what's called a TestNav configuration identifier. And typically it is Aspire in all caps, a dash, and then a 5-digit code. And that 5-digit code is specific to your IP address. So what that's going to do is, from the student's device, it's going to check the connectivity from that device to make sure it's able to connect to the Proctor Cache server and pass information back and forth. So it's doing a number of things. And when you put that configuration identifier and run the app check here, it's going to check to make sure that TestNav is able to connect in the kiosk mode. It's going to check for connectivity to the actual Proctor Cache server itself. And then it's also going to be able to verify that test content is being able to be shared back and forth. We have one quick question here. We noticed that the MSI installer does not upgrade over last year's TestNav install. It would be handy to be able to push TestNav as an upgrade without needing to uninstall the old version first. That is true. So Mackenzie asked, is there a way to, first, we notice that the MSI installer does not upgrade over last year's. So we would recommend, again, that you completely uninstall last year's TestNav devices themselves. You know, if you're running a managed server, go ahead and remove it. Sometimes restarting, you know, do a compile pull and delete the TestNav app itself. Many times you can restart the device itself to make sure it's gone, and then reinstall, or I guess install a new version of the MSI push that device out to all of your devices themselves from the managed server. This will make sure that it says, you know, TestNav, it's installing the latest version of TestNav 8.8. Another question would be, it would be great if it doesn't, if you didn't have to upgrade it. Though, so TestNav actually is only, do you have to uninstall and reinstall? We've only had to do that twice in the history, in probably the past 4 or 5 years. Typically at the runtime, so when we start up TestNav from the very beginning, it checks to see if there's any smaller releases that it needs to update, and it automatically performs that function on initialization before you get to that main login screen. So that is the screen. So before you even get to that, it'll run that verification to make sure it has a lot of latest software. What's hard with this is that we totally redesigned TestNav 8.8 to reintroduce this app check feature and pull that function into this particular application itself. And that, because of that, we required that you uninstall the last version, and want to make sure that it wasn't, we don't have any, you know, remnants of the last version, and we want to make sure that you have the most recent version. The most recent version, when you get to this particular screen, you can look in the bottom right hand corner, and it'll say 8.8.166. So the 8.8 section is the TestNav 8.8. And then you'll see throughout the year, when you log in a TestNav, that instead of 166, maybe that'll go up to 170 or 175 or 180. And those are the smaller releases that happen throughout the year that the actual application will go through upon initialization and make sure that it's updating on the latest version. So we do apologize that this did happen, and the major upgrade happened in the middle of summer. But if you haven't updated anything from last year to this particular year, it's the development team's recommendation that you completely uninstall last year's version and reinstall this latest version. Okay. So again, I know we've gone a little bit an hour here. We have about maybe 15 minutes more to discuss here. Let me get back at the app check. So app check again, you have, if you don't have a configuration identifier, it'll go pull the test content directly from the ACT Aspire servers. If you do have a configuration identifier, it'll verify that you can get that connectivity from your Proctor cache server. So it's a good way to be able to check that you have all your test content. Now, someone in our last session asked, do I need to run this from every single student's device? The answer is, it's up to you from a technologist if you want to do that. Typically, no. If you know that, it's good practice to go through maybe 1 or 2 machines in each room to make sure that there's no firewall or other issues that are blocking connection from that particular location on those students' devices to the Proctor caching server. So I would say that, again, we recommend doing that to 1 or 2 devices. But once you've done that, you validated that you have the latest version of TestNav, you really don't, it's really just rerunning that same test over and over again from every single device. So if you want to do it to verify that, everything's set up properly, that's great, but it's not something that is a highest necessity. Okay, so again, if you wanted to get that configuration identifier one more time, you would log into the portal, you click on organization and Proctor cache settings, and then right at the bottom of the screen, you will have the app check configuration identifier. If you notice that here, so I know before I was talking about the IP address itself and the port. If you wanted to see what the app check configuration identifier is that you would put into each of those students' workstations for the app check component, that's where you would get that configuration identifier. And again, it's typically Aspire all in caps with a dash and that 5-digit code, and that is specific to your IP address. Okay, now we're going to talk real quick about the infrastructure trial. So what is the infrastructure trial? So the infrastructure trial is a dress rehearsal for the entire technical side of the computer-based assessment for spring of 2017. It does not have real student information there. We don't recommend doing that, but it's from a technical standpoint, it's a good sandbox environment. So if you want to check to make sure that you have all of your utilities and all of your components set up properly and they're all talking back and forth, it's a good environment to be able to do that. You can, the one thing with the infrastructure trial is that it's the same email address and that's your user ID and password to get into the portal. You'll have access to both your production system as well as your infrastructure trial. Upon setting this up initially, your admins will automatically get access into the infrastructure trial tenant. If you do not have access into the infrastructure trial tenant yourself. When you log in, you see this, and I'm going to show you how to be able to navigate to it to find out which one you're in. You can either request that from the customer service line, or you can touch base with your admin in your local district to be able to grant you access into that. So again, it's a way or a dry run to go into a sandbox environment to make sure that your test nav is configured correctly, that all your devices can run successfully on test nav, that network can bear the load. So we've had some folks that want to have all their students come in and just try a test out to see, you know, if it's going to handle the load. Many times too, we recommend doing that at the same time a day that you're going to be testing from. And what's nice is it tests 3 different things. It tests that your network is set up correctly, so it helps you from a technology standpoint and make sure that you have all the apps and Proctor Cache set up correctly. You also can use it from a student perspective, so the student knows how they're going to log in and use the username and password and what it's actually going to look like and navigate through. And then the third component is from a staff perspective. If you want to be able to set up some test sessions so that you know, the staff, the room supervisors are going to know, hey, how am I going to tell on the day of testing? What am I going to be able to do? How do I know all these students are actually logged in? If they have issues or if they're done, you know, what does that change within the test session detail screen? And so the infrastructure trial is a great environment to be able to test that. So you may ask, how do I know if I'm in, how do I get into the infrastructure trial tenant, or the environment itself? So first, when you log in to ACT Aspire, in the top right-hand corner, it'll say Wyoming right next to the house on the top right-hand corner. That means that you're in the production environment. Okay, so you'll have a particular district and school that you're associated to at the organization, but where you look at that house in the top right-hand section that says Wyoming, that means you're in production. Now, if you want to switch from the production environment and go to the infrastructure trial site, you would click on the user profile, where that blue circle is on the top right-hand side. Click on that, select user profile. That'll open up the screen below, which will be the profile details. And again, it'll say your current tenant is in Wyoming. You would click on that down arrow, and you would either, there's only going to be one other option for you, what's called infrastructure trial. I'm going to switch to the next screen. It's going to be infrastructure space trial _ WY. You're going to click apply, and then that link in the top right-hand section that says instead of Wyoming will change to the infrastructure trial Wyoming. So that's how you know if you're in the infrastructure trial site versus the production Wyoming site. So your user should be able to switch back and forth. And again, if you're not able to, you can contact customer service and they can give you access into that, as well as your admin should be able to grant you access into the infrastructure trial site as well. Okay. Questions? I think we've gone through a number of questions. Let's see here, through the group section, I think I've answered the test nav, questions you had, Proctor Cache programs. We noticed that the MSI installer, we talked a little bit about that. Why you needed to upgrade from previous years and how often you need to do that. Are there any questions, other questions that we haven't addressed throughout the session? Maybe open up your chat session and go ahead and ask that to any of us. Give everyone just a second here to do that. Okay, as we're doing that, I did want to put the customer service information on here. Again, the customer service line is 888-802-7502. They are available Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. So if you want to call in, you're more welcome to do that. There is the email address. If you wanted to email a question and have them reply back to you, that is ACT-Aspire, that is _implementation at actaspire.org. And again, both of those are at the bottom of every single page in the portal. If you are calling in, I would suggest pressing 8 for specific Wyoming folks. So from a call center perspective, those folks have been trained specific to the Wyoming implementation, would be able to answer your questions there. I would recommend that if you do have any policy type questions, that you contact the Wyoming Department of Education. But if you have anything specific to ACT-Aspire from a implementation standpoint or a technology standpoint or from an admin standpoint, feel free to call us, email us. And then we also do have one more option. If you notice in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice a new box that is a chat functionality. So as you're going through the portal itself and you had questions and you want to ask a person online, you can click the chat box. It'll open up another little window on to the left-hand side, and you'll be able to chat one-on-one with the individual live within the session. Okay, looks like, let's see, false positive question was not fully answered. So I'm actually going to unmute you here. Okay, give me some details or questions about around that particular question around false positive and what specifically you're asking there.
So can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, so last year we had an issue where we had a lot of students getting kicked out of their tests because TestNav lost focus. It was detecting that it lost focus to an application, but we didn't have any other applications running. So it was like we had issues with background processes, and it was like TestNav was way overly sensitive to background processes, and it would get false positives and then kick kids out of the test.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, so thanks for that. So depending on your setup and what devices you're using, if you think of when TestNav launches, it pretty much takes over the device itself. And the reason why is because, you know, for security reasons, you don't want someone, a student opening up TestNav and then alt-tabbing over to a browser in a Google and requesting the information and then coming back and doing that. So there's a lot of processes that need to be, you know, shut down in order to maintain some kind of security within the given device. Now, the applications themselves are, you know, highly recommended. They do a good job at, you know, only maintaining connectivity within that particular TestNav app. So if the student touches outside of that particular app or tries to alt-tab or navigate to another process that's running, it would actually stop the TestNav service, and you'd have to resume the test session to be able to log back into it. And I think that's what you're referring to. Sometimes it loses function, it loses focus, if you will, of the TestNav test session itself, and it kicks the student out. So depending on your setup, it could be a couple of things. It could be, we've seen it in the past where students' devices go into like a sleep mode or a screensaver comes up, which changes the focus away from TestNav and changes to the screensaver, and the student moves something on the machine and it reinitializes TestNav. We do recommend that you turn any type of screensavers and those type of devices off. We've also seen on Google Chromebooks, sometimes they've done an update. It'll go through and try to update some of the you know, OS itself during a test session. We want to make sure you have that off. What we'd really recommend is that you, before you do your setup, if you're running into those issues in the sandbox environment, contact us. We have technicians that work through those and have various suggestions on being able to mitigate those and can help work with you in that specific instance. It could be a number of things, unfortunately, but we want to make sure that your environment is set up, that your students are test data secure, and that the responses that they're giving are stored, encrypted, and transferred in the most secure manner possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, again, if you have any questions, feel free to call our customer service line, email, or chat with a particular representative. Again, this particular session I'm recording and will be posted on the Wyoming State Advocate site for ACT Aspire underneath T for trainings. And I did put this entire PowerPoint presentation out there as well. So if you wanted to go through, and it's a PDF version that you can pull up, and if you wanted to look at the various screens themselves, you're able to do so. So I appreciate everyone's time and look forward to you all joining in our next training. Again, those are the test administration trainings that are March 21st and the 23rd. All right. Thank you for your time, and everyone have a good rest of the day.